So the reason we were watching this video is because of the text editor this guy's using. This guy isn't just typing with like, I don't know, some sort of just keyboard shortcuts. This is actually what the text editor is. In a way it is keyboard shortcuts though, but he doesn't use his mouse for anything. Everything he does, all of the movement that he does around the text editor, everything he types, even the copy pasting and everything, he does that all through this text editor. It's a very efficient text editor that has somewhat of a learning curve, but once you get through that learning curve, you can pretty much code at the speed of which you think, which is what this guy's doing. And that brings us to Vim. This is Vim. Doesn't look all crazy, but here's the thing. Vim is a modal text editor. That means it has different modes for inserting and editing text. If you noticed on the video, you could see that sometimes you'd see insert mode here come up, and other times there was nothing popping up. So those are some of the different modes of Vim. Like when he's just navigating through the file, not typing anything, he was in something called normal mode, which just lets you navigate around. But when he's actually typing stuff, he's in something called insert mode, where you can actually type stuff in. That's where you really do most of your coding in. Vim is a programmable text editor. It's very customizable, very modular. So there's a lot you can accomplish with Vim if you're the type of person who likes to fiddle with your text editors. But the main thing that draws us to Vim is the fact that the interface itself is a programming language. I don't want to say that this text editor just keyboard shortcuts, because it's not. The interface is quite literally a programming language. And I say that because you can compose keystrokes with each other. And I'll elaborate on what that means later. But for now, I'll show you guys what I mean by modal editing. Trying to change windows here for a second. Oh, so this is not popping up. So Vim has modes. What we are normally in Vim is something called normal mode. Normal mode is basically the default mode and where you spend most of your time in Vim. And the key that you press to get to normal mode always is going to be escape. Some people usually rebind it to caps lock because the thing about Vim is that you don't want to make your fingers move too far. You don't even want to touch the mouse in Vim. You want to make sure that everything you do is efficient and optimized. But if you have a shorter keyboard, if you have a 60% keyboard, then escape is just fine. You can go to different modes from normal mode, and that's how the whole modularity thing works. That's why it's a modal text editor. So the second most popular mode that you're going to be in is insert mode, which is where you actually edit the text, where you insert your text. That's the text editor aspect. And then another very important aspect is controlling the window, controlling Vim itself in something called the command line mode. And you enter the command line mode by doing colon, or you can also denote this as shift semicolon. There's another mode called replace mode. It's pretty much what it is. You replace stuff, but I don't think it's used as often. But it is one of the modes. Either shift R or just R. Capital R, I mean. And then another very useful mode for selecting chunks of text and performing operations on them is something called visual mode. By default, it's going to be something called visual plane mode, where you can, it's probably better by demonstrating, actually. So if I enter visual mode here, regular visual, this is called visual plane mode. I can kind of just go line by line, go character by character. So So that's what we call visual plain mode. You enter that by pressing V. But there's two other visual modes called visual line mode, which you enter with Shift V or capital V. And there's also visual block mode, where you can select blocks of text, and I'll demonstrate both. Right now we're in regular visual mode. There's going to be visual line mode where you select entire lines. And then there's visual block mode where you can select chunks like blocks of text. You're literally selecting like blocks of text. You can see like it's at the exact marker where I'm starting my visual block from and going from there. So going over each of these modes, normal is basically the mode you want to be in if you're moving around a file and making edits. Most of the time you will be in normal mode. You can switch to normal mode from any mode by just pressing escape. And then insert mode, probably the second most popular mode that you're going to be in, you enter by pressing I. In insert mode, I mean, it's literally what the name says. You insert text. You can see down here, it says insert. And actually, let me bring up keystrokes. If I press escape, it takes me to normal mode. If I press I, it takes me to insert mode. And then I can just start typing like text right there. And then of course, when we're in visual mode, you press V. You can select text. And command line mode, this is very important because command line mode is where you can do things like save the file. So saving files in Vim, you do :W. It might not seem so intuitive, but think of it as write. You're writing to the file by doing :W. So if you do :W, it'll say however many characters are in the file have been written, and you effectively save the file. The second most important command that you might use in command line mode is :Q, which just quits it. But the caveat is, it's not going to let you quit if you've made any changes to the file. So if I made changes, like I just add some random text, and if I try to quit, it's not going to let me, because you made a change in the file. In that case, what you can do is you can force quit and forego all your changes by doing Q and then exclamation mark. And that gets you out of there. And another useful thing you can do, you can actually compose writing and quitting, so you can save and quit essentially by doing :WQ. And the main thing you need to know, how to actually open files in Vim, you can go to your command line and then you can type in the name of the file. But you can also do it from inside Vim. So if I just go to regular Vim, I can do Control-E, this stands for edit, and then the name of the file. And then I can go through all of these files, pick the one I want to edit, and then I can open it up. So I mentioned that you spend most of your time in Vim in normal mode because that's where what we call navigation commands are. Navigation is how you move around the file. Now if you've noticed, if you've been looking at this like overlay here, you can see that I move around the file by using H, J, K, and L. This is really not intuitive at all, but this is how you basically move around files in Vim. H moves you left one character, J moves you down one character, and then K moves you up, L moves you right. So H is left, J is down, K is up, L is right. It's really not intuitive, you just have to practice with it really to get used to it. But these really are the basic movement commands in Vim. And these aren't the only movement commands though. There's much more useful movement commands. Like if I do W, it's going to take me to the next word. And what I mean by that is it checks for like white space, and then it takes me to the next word if I press W. This is really practical. As you can probably guess in programming, you can just go to the next word and then start directly editing from there. You can also do B, takes you to the beginning of the word. If you keep on pressing B, it takes you backward. You can press E, go to the end of the word. And regarding insert mode, instead of pressing I, you can also press A, which appends instead. So like if you press I and then you start typing something, it's going to go before where your cursor is at. But if you press A, then it starts typing in front. So this is going to be really useful if you're going to like the end of the word by pressing E and then append, and then you can just add whatever. And another really useful, movement command is the percent symbol. This isn't very intuitive, but what you can do is essentially, if you're on parentheses, or if you're on square brackets or something like that, if you press percent, it takes you to the corresponding one. It takes you to the beginning one, or I mean the starting one and the closing one. So you can pretty much start writing code after whatever semicolon, or not semicolon, curly brace, parentheses, square bracket. Very efficient in that sense. And another movement command you can use is going to the beginning of a line by pressing 0. And if we know beginning of the line, there has to be one for end of the line. That's right. It's going to be $. You might be wondering, why is it $? Why is it 0? It doesn't sound intuitive, but that's because it's based off of something called regex, which is basically, it's a kind of commonly used programming interface, I guess you could say, for search terms. You guys could look it up if you're interested. It's very commonly used throughout a lot of programming in general, really. But that's essentially why we have 0 and $. And another really useful one is you can press caret. You see 6 on the left, but I'm actually pressing Shift and 6 to give me caret. This brings you to the first non-blank character of the current line. And if you ever want to like go through a file and just delete everything, what you can do is you can go to visual mode by pressing V and then press capital G. If you press capital G, it takes you to the end of the file, and then you can delete everything. Alternatively, you can start from the beginning of the file, press GG, and then you can delete everything, because GG brings you to the beginning of the file. Another pattern that you have in Vim is you can sort of find characters in the current line. So if I wanted to go to I could do F for find, and then I brings me to the next I. If I wanted to find an I before, I can do capital Fi, and that brings me to the first occurrence of I have before my cursor. So that's really useful if you just want to like move directly to something in the line to start typing some text. And another thing you can do that's probably in every single text editor anyway is you can search for stuff with just / /, and you can just type in a search term like we do candies, and then it takes me to the first occurrence of that search term. If I press enter, I can actually move through all of the occurrences of that word by pressing N, which moves me forward, and Shift N, or capital N, which moves me backward. And one thing, if you are familiar with what regex is, when you do / to search for something, you can actually enter a regex term and then search for that instead. But for simplicity's sake, we can just type in whatever we want. If I want to find candy is great, as I want to find that list, I can just go through it by pressing N, capital N, after doing the search. So editing is accomplished in Vim, as we've seen so far, by these standalone editing commands. But really, what we use Vim for is the ability to compose these editing commands with movement commands. And what I mean by that is, you might have noticed sometimes, if you're looking at the overlay to the side, you can actually perform compound movements with these simpler movements. So let me show you what I mean by that. One thing you can do is C for change. If you do just C, nothing's going to change. But if you do C, W, what you're going to do is change word. So this is literally what it says. You change the word that you're at right now. So I could change candies to I could change it to chocolates, for instance. And that's what we call a motion. So this is a command that requires a motion. C, you can't just use it because, I mean, like, if you're changing something, you need something to change. What are you going to change? You can change a word. You can change to the end of the line by pressing C and then $. And basically what that does is it deletes everything after your cursor, and it puts you in insert mode. And another thing you can do is you can also prepend what we call a count by pressing a number and then C. So if I did 4 and then C, it would delete 4 characters and then start letting me change them. Or actually, no. I think that's a different command. But we'll go over what counts are, what motions are, a little bit more in detail later. But just think of C as change. Change is essentially deleting some text and then putting you in insert mode. And it's really useful. It's probably one of the most common things you're going to use in Vim. We know about inserting text, and we know about changing text. But what we don't know is how to delete text. So one way you can delete text is pressing X. That just deletes whatever is at your cursor right now by just pressing X. But what you're likely going to do a lot more often, you're going to do D, and then you're going to give it a motion. Like DW, delete word, would delete that word. $, would delete to the end of the line. D0 would delete to the start of the line. So really, these compound emotions are what you really want to learn, because it's really inefficient to like do something like go into visual mode and then try to delete everything, as opposed to just having D and then $. You're good at Vim. You can say you're good at Vim if you find the fastest way to do something. And the thing with Vim is there's probably always going to be a faster way to do things. And that's why we use Vim. It's for its efficiency. We want to make sure that it saves us as much time as possible, and it gives you a lot of avenues to save that time. Vim can be very complex, but it's not really as hard to pick up as people say it is. It's really just you use it a little bit, you get used to it, you start programming with it, and it's going to pretty much become second nature to you when you're editing text. So going back to deleting, we had D and X. We found that D, you needed a motion to delete stuff. X, you didn't. X, you could just do X, but it's really slow, not as commonly used. You can use it in conjunction with visual mode by selecting text and then pressing X. But a more common thing you can do rather than do D $, you can actually just delete a whole line by pressing DD, and that just deletes the line. And you can also delete multiple lines by prepending it with the number. So if I did 4DD, that would delete 4 lines. And that's something we call a count, having the 4 before it. And we'll go over that in more detail shortly. And there are some more miscellaneous commands that you really should know, like undo. Undo is just you. You have to be in normal mode though. So like if I deleted this entire line, I would press escape and then undo, and then it undoes that. If I wanted to redo, I could do Control R, and that would redo whatever change I just did. I could undo it again, and then every programmer's favorite, we can have copy with W, and then paste with P. So you're actually not going to use this as often, I think. But if you want to copy paste from like Google or something, what you do is you copy from it, and then you do Control-Shift-V. Because the thing with Vim is, when you have this Y for copy, oh, by the way, it's called Y in Vim because it's like a mnemonic for yank. So yank is how we denote copy in like Linux, I guess you could say. But it's pretty much synonymous with copy for the most part. And P is just paste, so that's pretty easy to remember. So you have yank and paste. But the thing is, the thing that makes it kind of different from copy is that it doesn't go from your system's clipboard where you copy things. When you yank something, you're actually yanking it into Vim only. So like if you yank something, I don't think you're going to be able to copy paste it into something like Google. You probably need like a plugin or something, or actually Vim probably already has it, but probably a different feature. Vim has these things called buffers, and you can't paste directly from Google or something because Vim doesn't know about it. The only way Vim knows about it is through your computer itself, because Control-Shift-V is kind of like a shortcut for just saying paste whatever I have in my clipboard, no matter what program it is, paste it there. So like, don't think that having Y and P is synonymous with copy and paste, because it has different behaviors. So yank and paste pretty much only applies to inside of Vim. For outside, you would probably be better off with just Control-C and then Control-Shift-V once you're in Vim. So those are some really important miscellaneous commands. There's a lot more really cool ones. If you actually look at the Vim documentation, Vim has like a lot of commands, and a lot of them can just save you a lot of time. These are just some of the basic ones, some of the most commonly used ones. But earlier we were talking about how we can combine motions and have like these compound commands. Like if I did 3DD, it would delete 3 lines, and I could do DW, and the W part would be something we call a modifier. Like it would be delete word. So this is command composition in Vim, composing commands with one another. This allows you to perform a series of commands with the minimum amount of keystrokes. So you can do this by prefixing your commands with a count and postfixing them with a modifier, or both. So what I mean by that is you can have something like, you can have just D won't do anything because by default it's going to require a modifier. Every command you can have a count and a modifier. So D, if I wanted to delete a word, I would put DW, and if I wanted to delete the next 3 words, including the current word I'm on, then I could do 3DW. This deletes 3 words starting from where I'm at. So this is the count, it's the modifier, and you can use it in conjunction with a lot of commands. So one thing you can even do actually is just, you can do 3J, that moves you 3 down. If you did 3K, moves you 3 up. There's really no limit to what you can do with command composition. It's probably Vim's most powerful feature and what really sets it apart from other text editors and keyboard shortcuts. Keyboard shortcuts do not allow you to do this. Command composition is really powerful, and a lot of the time it's intuitive. If there's like a command composition that you don't find intuitive, you could probably just think of one, really, because some of them can be a little bit harder to remember. Like I'll actually give you an example for one in a bit. But some more common ones that we're probably going to end up using regarding command composition: DW, delete word, C $, delete everything until the end of the line, and then enter insert mode, where you're essentially changing until the end of the line. And here's something that's not as memorable. So if I had a string, like a single quoted string, just string, what I can do is I can do D, or D, A, and then single quote. And what that does is it deletes everything inside the quotes and the quotes itself. So what DA single quote means? So we have this modifier, but we also have kind of like a addition to the modifier in this quote. So what this A means, it means around. So around means delete whatever's inside of the quotes as well as what's around it. So that would be including the quotes itself. So it might not seem like very intuitive, but usually Vim does try to keep things very intuitive. So that's DA single quote, and if you had like double quotes, then you could do DA double quote, and that would delete, including the double quotes and the word itself. And another useful thing you can do with that, if you have parentheses, you can do C, I, parentheses, and you change what's inside the parentheses. This is probably one of the more useful ones. So you have C, I, parentheses. So you have C, which needs a modifier. We're going to give it I. What I stands for is inside. We change what's inside the parentheses. We don't actually remove the parentheses themselves. And what we have here is just what we want to change. So this is actually something like curly braces, then it would change everything inside of the curly braces. And this is probably stuff that is in other IDEs, but you can do it a lot faster in Vim, and that's why we use Vim for its speed, really, for its efficiency. And some IDEs do have like a lot of features that you can probably get in Vim as well, because Vim is very customizable, very modular. You can even code Vim by using something called Vim script. You can install Vim plugins that essentially let you do the same things as other things like VS Code or Visual Studio, Sublime Text, Notepad++. But now that we've covered basically inserting things in Vim, changing things, deleting things, selecting things with V, let's talk about how you can actually do some more advanced stuff in Vim. So one thing you can do is you can enter command line mode by doing your colon there, and then you can do SP, which stands for split. What you do is you split your window. So by default, it gives you a horizontal split where the second window is going to be split horizontally. But what you can also do is you can do VSP for vertical split, where the other window is going to be split vertically. Now it might seem like I'm splitting horizontally, but what it really means is create the second window in a vertical orientation. And you can swap between these windows by doing Control plus W and then HJKL. So like if I had multiple of these, then I could do Control W HJKL and just navigate between these different windows. And HJKL pretty much corresponds to what they normally correspond to, with K taking you up to the next window, L taking you to the right window, H taking you to the left window, and J taking you to the window that's below. So with Vim, you can have these multiple windows open, and then one of the things that Vim has is something called a buffer. So Vim, if I start editing this file, like anywhere, I can see the changes pop up in the rest. That's because all of these share the same file buffer. They all see the file at the same time. So you can have pretty much the same buffer in multiple windows. And this has some implications. It can be really efficient for editing, but in the interest of time, we're not really going to get into it. So to kind of wrap things up, I'm going to show a couple more really useful commands. Another very common thing that a lot of IDEs have is search and replace. So in Vim, what you do is enter command line mode with semicolon, and you do %s, enter a search term, like if I wanted to enter candies, and then that's going to be my search term. That's the term that I'm going to search throughout the file for, and then I'm going to have a replace term, what I want to replace it with. I could replace it with chocolates, and then I enter another slash, and then I enter G for global, which means it's going to do it globally throughout the file. And it changes everything to chocolates. You can do this in most IDEs. It's a default feature. But in Vim, you can do it literally in one line. You don't have to open anything. You don't have to click anything. You can just do it right then and there. And another feature that Vim has is something called macros, where you can record what you do and just replay it. So it's kind of like, if you guys know what auto hotkey is, you can just like repeat commands you can repeat series of commands, essentially scripts, by pressing a button. So how you do that is you press Q and then some character, any character. What it's going to do is it's going to associate that character with the series of commands that you're going to be performing, or basically the script that you're going to be performing. It's going to save it into that character. So I did Q and then 3. You can see it says recording at 3. It's going to store whatever I do in until I stop this macro in 3, and I can access it later. So if I wanted to do something like delete 3 lines, 3dv, and then I press Q again, that stops the macro. And if I want to replay the macro, I can do add 3, and then that replays the macro I just made. So you can make your custom macros and actually like do these really complex commands, and just by pressing the and symbol and then that character. You can just repeat that command over and over. You can also execute a macro a certain number of times by using the count thing we had earlier, by having count and then you have your and, which starts a macro, and then whatever character you stored it in. So pretty much counts and modifiers apply to everything. App probably has some modifiers too. I don't know if it's going to be the same as like having word or end of line, but everything has count, everything has modifiers. Definitely try to experiment with those. So to wrap things up, just give you guys like a final parting thought on this. You should learn Vim, not to just use Vim, because let's say you do want to use something like Visual Studio Code, Android Studio, or really anything else. The thing is, you can have Vim integration in all of those. What I mean by that is, all of these usually have some sort of like Vim plugin that lets you use Vim commands in those things, in those interpreters, in those IDEs. And that means that Vim is pretty much a universally applicable language. You can use Vim in anything. Anything that has been programmed by someone, 95% chance someone has wrote a plugin or a script that lets you pretty much use Vim keybinds on it. You can do it in your command shell. There's even one for Google. You can literally have Vim on Google. And it actually says this here, probably somewhere. Yeah. There's Vim key binding extensions for web browsers, Vimium for Google Chrome, Tridactyl for Firefox. But Vim is like very ubiquitous. It's very popular, and the reason we learn Vim is not just to use this Vim editor in itself, but rather so we can apply it anywhere. LeetCode actually has it as well. If you go to LeetCode, if you press the I symbol on the top right, it lets you pick Vim as kind of like a customization option for your editor. But with that being said, I'd say this was not as complex of a lecture, but that doesn't mean it's easy. You guys definitely do have to practice with Vim. So what I want to leave you guys with is try to use Vim for pretty much everything that you do in editing for the next week. See if you enjoy it. It will take a little bit to get used to, but the dividends that it pays is like, you can't count it. It's not measurable. It will save you a lot of time in the future when editing. It has for me, and when I first learned it, I didn't really think it would be that useful. I just thought it was just like another text editor with a giant learning curve, no practicality, but Vim can be really useful, and most of all, it's fun. It's actually fun, like using Vim, doing all these different commands. So I encourage you guys to try it out. And if you check on our GitHub page, it gives you a couple exercises to go through. Like one thing, if you want to learn Vim, practice Vim, you can do Vim tutor in your command line. And this is basically what Vim comes with to teach you Vim. It shows you a lot of really useful commands. So definitely go through this if you can. But that concludes our meeting for Vim. As always,